In regards to so what the future will look like, what's the breed of entrepreneur that we need? And I'm gonna, if you want to share this story, I think that was a really funny story about you talking to Elon Musk about Hyperloop and how he like, oh yeah, like the way he looked at the problems and everything was fascinating. So what do you think is the breed of entrepreneurs that's needed in this kind of new age? And also, if you can share that story. That
yeah, sure. So Elon is designing the Hyperloop, as you know, and open sourced it because he's got 4 other companies. By the way, his methodology is very, very simple, right? He looks at a technology that's accelerating exponentially, and he plots 10 years out. Where will that technology be in 10 years? And then he aims to build a company to intercept that curve in 10 years. Okay?
Because it takes 10 years to
because
build
it kind of takes 10 years to build a global kind of solid company, and then you meet the curve and boom, off you go. And whether it's Tesla or SpaceX or Solar City or whatever, that's what he's doing, or the new brain company, et cetera. Right? It's very simple methodology, riding out those 10-year patterns. If you can see and project out where they go and then live off it. Ray Kurzweil has been doing this for decades. And he designed this Hyperloop thing. The idea is to go from LA to San Francisco in 20 minutes at about 4,000 miles an hour. I was on the Economist magazine has an annual Innovators Award, and I was on one of the judges, and so I was chatting with Elon about this at this award ceremony. And I said, Elon, I have a degree in theoretical physics. If you accelerate a human being in 20 minutes from 0 to 4,000 miles an hour and then decelerate them back to 0, you're probably going to kill them. And his answer was, yes, it's an issue, right? And this is the pattern, this is the mentality, I think, that is so important and so needed in this next generation, where they just go, yeah, we'll figure it out, you know? And what's important is I would have stopped. I would have gone, that's not possible, and let's not bother. I would have been the resident expert going, you can't do that. Let's figure out a different way. That whole Hyperloop thing would never work, et cetera. And yeah, I would have stopped. And so this is the tension that we see in the world now of you've got an old way of thinking and a completely new way of thinking that are fundamentally not compatible, right? Vitalik Buterin, 18 years old, from Toronto, invents Ethereum.
Brilliant.
Right? Based on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. By the way, there's some bylaw written somewhere that you have to be below 25 years old to program the blockchain. I don't know where that's written, but it seems to be like universally followed, because you can't get your heads around it, right? And you look at bankers versus Bitcoin as a classic example of the immune system. It's so alien to them. They can't conceive of this thing, because all money used to measure scarcity, and now we have a monetary system of abundance. So I spend now all of my time on this immune system problem, and we've cracked it. We've been working for 3-4 years on solving it in organizations and companies. We run a 10-week process, and we're able to move leadership, culture, management thinking 3 years ahead in that 10-week period. So the next book that's coming out open source is that. But now the work that I'm doing, and more
that's called Exponential Transformations, by the way.
Yeah, and it's basically a manual on how to run this 10-week process. We piloted it with Procter & Gamble 3 years ago, and we've now run it like a dozen times with global blue chip companies. And so we're super excited about that, because pretty much every one of the global 5,000 has to go through this process, with or without us. So let's just open source and see where it goes. But the really interesting work we're doing now is how can we apply that to the public sector? Because in the public sector, the existing policy is the immune system, right? You try and update transportation and you get taxis versus Uber, et cetera, et cetera. The Uber strategy of deliberately breaking the law, leapfrogging to public acceptance and then waiting for policy to catch up is very successful for them, but it's a very uncomfortable process, right? So how can we navigate that? And so once we cracked this at the private sector level, we said, okay, could we apply this to public sector? And so we formed a nonprofit, and we ran it a few times in Medellin in Colombia. And it takes 16 weeks because it's public sector. But we find we can take a problem like transportation or healthcare or education, and we aim to solve that problem for 1/10 of what it's currently costing.
So 10x.
10x better, right? Which makes it compelling from an economic perspective, and everybody gets excited.
We're listening now.
And, yeah, and for example, in Miami, in most big cities actually, they spend $4,000 per transit passenger per year for public transportation.
4,000.
4,000. For that, you could give everybody a car and just dismantle the entire public transportation. Because if you're running in a medium-sized city, most of the bus routes run empty 90% of the time,
so
which costs a ton of money.
Underutilized asset completely.
Totally. In fact, a few cities are now saying, the hell with all of our public transportation, we'll just use the taxes to pay for Uber and get rid of it. And it's super successful. And it works really well. Right? So the question is, can you run this in the public sector? So we ran it a few times in Medellin. to test it out. We ran it last year with the mayor of Miami on the future of public transportation, and we just finished that process with in Colombia with the president's office and the Supreme Court to redo the justice system in Colombia. So fascinating to see how we can navigate this. Because you take a justice system, there's so much information like public court dates and court briefs and filings that could be on a blockchain, and then you make it uncorruptible in a sense and make it much more steady and faster.
It seems like, it feels to me that blockchain was probably created, it feels more targetable towards the public sector, since like the way security works and stuff like that. But my question is, and let's go towards here. I think this is interesting. What do you think in your the way you see the next couple of years in your work with the public sector, going from the private sector and working with them obviously much faster feedback, because we can learn, you can develop a better process. What do you think will be the impact towards the world if you get countries to hop on board and implement this methodology because it seems that that's the major roadblock to massive
it improvement. Is, and what we're thinking about is, okay, so we think there's a few big macro dynamics happening. Okay, one is that we have run the world for the last 200-300 years on the concept of the nation state. That does not work in the future. You take big cities like Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Shanghai. They're bigger and more complex than almost any country was 100 years ago, right? So we think what we'll end up with is city-states. In fact, if you think about Brexit or you think about Trump, this is not a left versus right thing. This is urban versus rural, right? London has too much power, and the rest of the country says, screw that, we're taking it back. Right? And we're going to pull out of Europe and cause a lot of mess because we're not getting what we want out of it. So this is the tension that we're seeing. And so what we think we'll end up doing, and in the same way that in society we're kind of hollowing out the middle class, and you get very rich or very poor, and in the business world you have very big search engines and very small applications, but nobody in the middle. There's no medium-sized search engines or medium-sized auction sites.
Because you can't.
You can't. It's too hard. You're either really big or really small. Okay, and if you're really big, you end up as a platform. And then you end up as an ecosystem. That's where the business world is heading. So we're kind of trying to build an ecosystem around our world and go straight for that kind of paradigm today. But if you think about that from a geopolitical perspective, you have the UN, you have nation states, then you have provinces or states, and then you have cities. Well, you don't need any of that in a world of abundance, right? Just as a quick point, very simple point, we invented representative democracies to run the world when information was scarce. Right? If you're in Washington, D.C., you had no idea what was happening in California because the speed of a horse was as fast as you could find out. And so you give people time to cross the country. Congress might occasionally to give people time to cross the country and say, here's what my people in Idaho are thinking. And you go, okay, that's what they're thinking, let's pass national laws to deal with that. But now we have an abundance of information. It gets misused, misinterpreted, faked, et cetera, and every major democracy is broken. Right? India, my family was very involved in the independence movement, broken, Brazil broken, the US breaking right now, UK broke 2 years ago. And it is not a sustainable form of government in the future that is coming towards us with like 1 trillion sensors, et cetera. It's moving too quickly, and democratic systems tend to make, they tend to make the right decisions, but they do it slowly, women's rights, et cetera. But we're in a world where we need to make decisions much more quickly, and we need to make decisions much more at a local level. Right? And so we think what we'll end up with is city-states at a governance model with a kind of a light federation of city-states to replace something like the UN. Right? The UN fundamentally doesn't work today because it's nation-state driven. And it's when one country can just veto what the hell's going on, it becomes irrelevant. And so we've done a great first crack at trying to create a global world order, but basing it on the concept of the nation-state is flawed. And you look at the problems in the US, right? This cannot sustain. In fact, Paul Saffo, one of the more famous futurists and forecasters in the world, made this point. He said, I do not expect the US to exist as a country in 25 years the way it's going. And you can see this happening.
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing that you're focused on that with your work, because it seems that on a scale of, like on the speed scale, that's the slowest organism that will move and is the biggest mismatch in terms of their impact. So it's fascinating that you're going to work towards more and more in that field and see how we can change.